Russia holding the World Cup this summer is like Hitler hosting the Olympics in 1936, says Boris Johnson. And he said the idea of Putin glorifying in the event made him feel sick.Mr. Johnson was asked whether he agreed that Moscow hosting the tournament was like Hitler hosting the Olympics in 1936. He said, "I think the comparison with 1936 is certainly right.It is an emetic prospect to think of Putin glorifying in this sporting event." But the Foreign Secretary said that England should not boycott it as on balance, it would be wrong to punish the team. Mr. Johnson was asked by Labour's Ian Austin about England's involvement in a World Cup he described as a PR exercise for Putin. But he accepted the UK needed to have an urgent conversation with the Russians about how they were going to make sure English fans are safe during the tournament. Mr. Johnson, who was being quizzed by MPs, suggested that Vladimir Putin orchestrated the Salisbury chemical weapon attack because to improve his chances in the election. The Foreign Secretary was asked if he believed the Russian president was directly involved in or gave the order for the attempted murder of former double agent Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia. Mr. Johnson told the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee, "It is our view that when it comes to the use of a Novichok-type nerve agent in Salisbury to attempt to assassinate somebody who had been identified by the Russian state as a target for liquidation, not long after President Putin said himself that such people would choke on their own 30 pieces of sliver, no matter how exactly it came to be done, the pathway, the chain of responsibility seems to me to go back to the Russian state and those at the top." And he attributed the timing of the terrifying attack on Putin's election, suggesting the president did it to get votes. Mr. Johnson said, "It is often attractive to conjure up the public image of an enemy. It was an attempt to excite a Russian electorate." The Foreign Secretary said that Putin wanted to give a message to potential defectors in Russian agencies that this is what happens to you if you decide that you support a country with a different set of values such as our own. He said that the UK does have a particular set of values and has called out Russia for its abuses. Whether it's in the EU or the UN, it's been Britain that has been the most obstinate in sticking up for our values. And he agreed that they had used Novichok to put, as it were, a Russian signature on the deed. Mr. Johnson said the attack was a sign that no former Russian agent was immune and no one could escape the long arm of Russian revenge. And he said he had been surprised by the strength of solidarity shown by the global community. He said, "I think there is a big difference in the global reaction to this event and the assassination of Alexander Litvinenko, and if you remember what happened 12 years ago, the world was in fact rather muted in the way that it responded. Instead," he said, "there is mounting disgust globally at what has been done, and that he had been surprised at the strength of the solidarity that there is with the UK." Mr. Johnson also suggested that after Brexit the UK may be able to impose tighter sanctions than the EU. But Labour's Ian Austin accused the Tory government of not taking the situation seriously enough. He said, "Nothing you'd have said this afternoon is going to have boots quaking in the Kremlin. It is about time our government woke up to the fact that we are not dealing with a democratic leader. Putin is an unreconstructed KGB thug. Mr. Johnson said, "We do not wish to engage in a new Cold War, and I deprecate that term. I remember the old Cold War, and it was a pretty miserable time. I grew up genuinely worrying that our country was going to be evaporated in a thermonuclear strike. I don't think we face that kind of existential threat, but it is a threat nonetheless, and we have to be tough and resolute." A spokeswoman for the Russian Foreign Ministry says Foreign Secretary is poisoned with hatred and anger after Boris Johnson suggested Russian President Vladimir Putin would use the World Cup in Russia in the same way Hitler used the 1936 Olympics.